Let's turn our attention now to international affairs, particularly issues around China, from Hong Kong to Xinjiang and the treatment of the Uyghur minority. I spoke to Professor of Intelligence and International Security at the ANU, John Blaxland, on the latest out of Hong Kong. Professor Blaxland, thanks for your time. This standoff at the Polytechnic University in Hong Kong seems to be fizzling now, but a lot of arrests being made and a lot of violence over recent days.
Yeah, and a lot of people who probably won't be seeing the streets for a long time now because of being arrested. But there seems to be a momentum that's still there. I don't get that this is over. I don't get that this is resolved. The stakes are so high. The people of Hong Kong seem to be so determined that they're really still after greater concessions. Concessions that it seems the Chinese state remains unwilling to make, but which is under increasing pressure to come to some resolution over, which is beyond just using repression because of the implications internationally, the implications for how China engages not just with Hong Kong, but also with Taiwan. And that's got some significant implications internationally.
So is this dissent more than this group of students at Polytechnic? We saw the big protests, but is that strength of feeling still there?
It certainly seems to be. I mean, this is from the reports I've read, the situation is much more than just about students. This is a broad-based movement, a sense of the opportunity is now. If momentum peters out now, then it's over for good. And there's a real concern that that can't be allowed to happen. And so that drives, I think, a sense of urgency and a sense of not having any real viable options. Carrie Lam just hasn't made enough of a concession, and she's under pressure, obviously, not to.
But so there's interesting the parallel or contrast between the urgency among the protesters and Beijing, which we know generally, not just in recent times, but for history, always plays the long game.
Absolutely. The long game is critical. And the lessons of Tiananmen are being played out at the moment as well. The much more carefully calibrated steps, the use of military to clean the streets, unarmed military to clean the streets, without necessarily getting technically legally sanctioned authority to do that. That's sending a very clear signal that China is going to continue pressing, and China can afford, it appears, to be able to play the longer game as long as other dynamics at work, which remain inside China domestically, don't work against Xi. And of course, this is what's so opaque about what's going on there. We know that there is a strong indication, I should say, that what's driving Xi to act so in such a repressive manner, not just in Hong Kong but with Uyghurs and so on, is a fear of an unravelling.
Well, the fear, I guess, just picking up on that, with the Uyghurs and the Xinjiang province, there was this massive leak through the New York Times, a dump of some 400 pages, a document which detailed in really concerning amounts of detail what's going on there in Xinjiang, and the fact that that leak happens in the first place must be a concern.
It's a scathing indictment on what's happening inside China, and it is a wake-up call to all those who are saying, "Oh, turn a blind eye," you know, and it speaks to a real issue for us in Australia about how we respond and how much we continue to air our concerns. And this is a really important thing, and it's very interesting in light of what we've seen former Prime Minister Paul Keating speak about the other day, in a hyper-realist kind of way about making concessions, about not standing on our high horse, you know, on principle, and that you know, playing a line that Thucydides would be proud of, you know, of the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. Well, you know, okay, I get that there's in absolute terms we need to be realistic, but we shouldn't be making concessions in advance. We should be very strongly standing up for our principles, like Maurice Payne has tried to do in the last few days, because we are a liberal democratic society that has, and what happens in our neighbourhood is they look at us, they know that we are we are a liberal Western democracy. We're a US ally. What we say and do is kind of like a benchmark for what's acceptable in the neighbourhood.
Well, we'll discuss the Keating speech more in a moment, but still on the leak, on the Xinjiang treatment, what does that say about the Chinese Communist Party now and their authorities, given they're normally as tight as a drum when it comes to information?
Well, that's right. It does raise a lot of questions about what's going on inside the Communist Party of China and how much of a grip does President Xi have over his own apparatus of state. Because there's lots of conjecture now out there about whether his repression is actually focused on dealing with his own insecurities and the prospect of competing power bases threatening him. And of course that's compounded by the fact that the economy is slowing and the situation domestically is not necessarily as favourable as others might suggest.
And on the Paul Keating front, just further to his comments, one of the things that stood out to me was his suggestion that there's a lack of subtlety in our foreign policy, that it's gone too much one way in terms of the security establishment as opposed to
I
diplomacy and being, I guess, nimble in a diplomatic sense.
So I think that's, I don't think he would have said that if he was still Prime Minister, because when you're inside, once you're getting this trusted advice from people who have access to the sensitive source material, you realise that the options we face aren't that wide. We have fairly narrow options about pursuing Australia's national interests, and that means pushing back to an extent within reason, but with beyond not to an extreme degree, but to a reasonable extent, pushing back in the protection of Australia's interests and our values as much as we reasonably can, in collaboration with those in the neighbourhood who'd be prepared to do so with us, while looking to maintain constructive relations with China and others. Now, clearly, the economic dimension of the relationship is critical. It's over a third of our trade is with China. It's clearly consequential. But the idea that it's a one-way street is just not true. The bottom line is China needs us. It doesn't buy from us because it likes our liberal Western democracy. It does so because it's a good deal and it needs what we sell. Now, if it stops needing it, it will stop trading with us on it.
But do you think there's room to be more constructive with China to ease the megaphone diplomacy?
Well, so, okay, what does more constructive look like, Kieran? The bottom line is the people who are calling for more constructive engagement are essentially calling for everybody to stop being critical, stop saying anything remotely that might affect the sensibilities of a very touchy and thin-skinned President Xi. Well, I'm sorry, but I just don't find that reasonable. This is a country where we are very proud of the way we call a spade, that we speak our minds, and we do so in a moderately respectful way.
One person that does that, absolutely. Well, two, Andrew Hastie and James Patterson, and we saw how thin-skinned the Beijing authorities are with that.
This is the thing. I mean, what is it? There's a classic Shakespearean line, "Methinks thee doth protest too much." What is it that you're so worried about? These two, from Beijing's perspective, you would have thought they're fairly inconsequential domestic politicians in the Antipodes. Why does it matter to Beijing? Why is it causing so much angst? There must be more to this. There is real concern about the implications of China not responding this way. But I think what Chinese authorities seem to be missing the point. They're actually making things worse. By taking this approach, they're completely reinforcing domestic concerns in Australia about making further concessions to China.
Hastie and Patterson, as if they're going to repent. Repent was the word, I think.
Exactly. It's like, give me a break. I mean, these are two fairly strong-minded individuals who are elected by, it's the democratic process.
But it makes the prospect of softening the criticism, as you
highly
say, it's
unlikely.
counterproductive.
It's completely counterproductive. And this is what's striking. I mean, why is China playing this game this way? Why does it think that this is going to generate a positive response domestically? It simply isn't.
Professor of Intelligence and International Security at the ANU, John Blaxland. Great to see you as always. Thanks.
Thanks for having me on the program, Kieran.